Okay, welcome. Hello, everybody. I am excited to be here today doing our live stream for this month. I think this is our last live stream for this month before the holiday and the new year. I cannot believe that it's going to be 2020 already. I feel like the world was supposed to have ended by now. So if you are joining me here today, I would love to see your name and where you're coming from in the chat box there. I can give you a little shout out here on the call. And today is kind of an interesting topic that we are exploring. We are talking about why do they ghost me, plus 3 steps to quickly magnetize lovers with staying power. And so I know that I probably don't need to tell you that breaking up with somebody is hard. Telling someone that you're not as into them as they may be into you can be kind of hard. Saying no is hard. Settling or let's say setting your boundaries can feel kind of hard. Expressing your needs can feel hard. Feeling afraid of rejection can be hard. Worrying that you're not good enough or that you're eventually going to disappoint someone else can feel hard. And then there's the anticipation of tears, potentially shouting or being called or accused of terrible things. On the other hand, it might be a terrible silence or a cold kind of passive-aggressive judgment that crawls up under your skin and convinces you that you must be a horrible, selfish person for drawing a line. And maybe that's why, for better or for worse, some people decide that a normal breakup just isn't worth it. And so they choose to disappear, or in other words, they ghost. But you might be surprised to find out that these are not the only reasons that people tend to ghost each other, nor is ghosting a phenomenon that is exclusive to romantic relationships. There are also other types of ghosting-like behaviors, which are more like dating a phantom that only shows up once in a while. And today we are going to tackle these topics and more. So specifically, we're going to talk about 3 different types of ghosting behavior. We're also going to take a look at what psychological studies reveal about the acceptance of ghosting behavior, including 8 possible reasons why people ghost. And I'm also going to introduce 3 steps to magnetize lovers with staying power. And these are going to lay the groundwork for next month's live stream series. So you want to make sure that you stick with me until the end, because if you have ever been ghosted, or you know someone who has, or you think you're about to be ghosted, you won't want to miss this live stream event here today. Now, before we dive into that, if you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Brianna McWilliam, and I'm a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator, and I have over 13 years in the field. And it is my mission to help insecure lovers go from self-doubting to self-sovereign and calling in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want, without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this using the McWilliam method, which fosters an expansion of consciousness and secure attachment using 3 practical tools. And that is cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experiential. And so this is how you put insight into action. And today we are going to focus on a little bit of cognitive reframing around the phenomenon of ghosting. So make sure you're subscribed and ring the bell for notifications, because I put videos out on Mondays and Thursdays, and we do these live Q&As as well, and I don't want you to miss out. So first, I want to discuss this term ghosting, and I would love to see it there in the chat box if you have ever been ghosted, right? So I'd love to see there if you just want to type, yes, I've been ghosted, or you could even say, if you haven't, no, that's never happened to me. I would love to know that too, so I know who I'm speaking to in my audience. And we have Chris here. Hi from Florida. You've helped me a lot over the past several months as I've gotten through a hard breakup. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Aw, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's good to hear that. There's a cat walking in front of me. Ryan says, yes, have been ghosted. Okay. Well, you know, it's interesting. We're going to talk about the prevalence of ghosting today and how often it happens to people. So, but first, I want to take a look at the term ghosting. So ghosting is basically when someone terminates a relationship by ending communications abruptly and without explanation. But Esther Perel, who is a relationship expert, suggests that we should consider ghosting behavior along a spectrum that also includes terms like simmering and icing. So you can also let me know in the comments there if you have ever heard of these terms. Simmering is basically when you let someone kind of simmer on the back burner. So you might say things like, yeah, I'd love to see you, but I'm going to be really busy this week. Why don't we just check in another week or so? Basically, it's kind of a feeling that like, I really don't have anything to give you, but I don't want to let you disappear from my life either. So I'll hold you at a comfortable distance and kind of let you simmer there. The other term she suggests is called icing. And this describes a greater degree of distance and uncertainty without cutting the cord. So it's like saying, look, it's not a good moment for me to be in a relationship at this point. I like you a lot, but I'm not going to be able to meet you where you're at. Maybe we should check in with each other again in a few months. Now, overall, I have a tendency to think that this is just being honest about where you're at. And sometimes being in a state of ambivalence about relationships is where you are at. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you responsible for someone else's feelings getting hurt when they wish that you were less ambivalent than you are, because that would make them feel better. I think that it is your job to be honest about your ambivalence and to let someone go when they are not ambivalent, and or find a way to become less ambivalent if that is what you want. I think it is their job to peace out when they realize that they aren't getting what they want, and to say no to you when you try to keep them around anyway without doing the work. Okay. But the problem is that not everyone has that level of consciousness around their own ambivalence. And so they send increasingly muddy mixed signals, which keep a person kind of hanging on at the edge of their seat. So in the perspective of the person that is simmering or icing, let's say, they think they're being honest. So in one moment, they really do like you. And so they text you something like, hey, I miss you. I think I want to be with you. And then in the next moment, they quite honestly and truly may not be so sure anymore. And so they text you, I'm sorry, I think I need some space to figure things out. Now, yes, let's say they are being honest in the moment. That is, in fact, how they were feeling in that moment. And oftentimes it's not actually a conscious manipulation, but they seem so hot and cold because they have little agency and regulation over their own emotions. They don't understand that there is a buffer space between the ebb and flow of our internal states and then how we actually choose to engage with the people around us, right? And so therefore they provide very, very little consistency. And the problem is also that they are also not assuming too much consciousness or responsibility around their feelings. So it's kind of like they're saying, I'm being perfectly honest about what is pushing me around right now. But then what is sort of left out is, and I assume I am powerless to stop it. So you'll just have to get beaten up alongside me if you want to catch a ride on this particularly rocky and winding road. Okay. And so if the same person is sending you confused messages like, hey, I miss you. I'm not sure what I want. I want to be friends. I don't want to see you anymore. I want to sleep with you. I think I want to give this relationship a shot. Oh, I can't handle this anymore. I'm not ready for a relationship. I can't stop thinking about you. You deserve better than me. Hey, why didn't you send me a shirtless pic? So I would have you realize that these messages and this person's emotions are all over the map. And if you're feeling confused, it's not because you've done something wrong. It's because that would be a normal response for any human being. And they are doing this intentionally to hurt you? I would say 8 out of 10 times, no, they are not. But 2 out of 10 times, perhaps they are. And if that's the case, realize how deep the wounds must be for that person if they feel that this is the only way to connect with someone. Okay. So why does ghosting hurt so much? Well, I would argue ghosting is particularly painful when there are no initial signs of simmering or icing involved, when the communication has been consistent or even intensely intimate right up until an inexplicable and abrupt silence. And so it leaves you feeling kind of helpless and confused. You worry that something has happened to the other person with no way to confirm it either way. You might worry that you've done something wrong, but you're left with no sense of agency and feel completely helpless to affect your own circumstances. You feel cut off and ostracized from the relational and energetic dialogue that was forming between you. And that feels like a stripping away of your personal power. That can lead to feeling quite painfully rejected and abandoned with no means by which to learn from the experience or make meaning of it. And so you might even start questioning not only the validity of the relationship that had been forming with this person, but of yourself as well. Am I not good enough? Did I offend them in some way? And so social psychologists say that this type of, let's say, chilly rejection from the ghoster sends a signal to your brain that your social belonging is low. And that damage is experienced as much worse for someone who already has low self-esteem, i.e., typically individuals with insecure attachment styles. Additionally, there was a 2009 study from the University of Arizona and of Maryland where they found that the anterior cingulate cortex, which is a part of the brain that activates emotional reactions and is also responsible for cyclical and obsessive thinking, is connected to the vagus nerve. And this is the very nerve that starts at the brainstem, travels down the neck, chest, and abdomen. So don't be surprised if you have a headache, a heartache, or even a stomach ache if you find yourself obsessing over what might have happened after you have been ghosted. Okay, so I just want to take a peek at what's going on in the chat box before I continue. Big Nass says, yes, I've been ghosted plenty of times. It's the standard way to end a casual relationship in the DC area. Tiffany says, I've heard of simmering, and I think that's happened to me. Efrat says, you describe it very accurately. Good. Chris says, simmering would happen to me a lot. A week of being withdrawn and then a text breaking up with me. This has happened 9 to 10 times over a 2-year period. It's extremely confusing and painful. Have you been spying on me this last year? I was about to say that. Can you imagine, friends, we've fallen for the same confusion? Yeah, it's not easy. And it happens to friends and coworkers as well. Now, you might be wondering, if the experience of being ghosted is so awful, why do so many people do it? So let's take a look at the prevalence and acceptance of this type of behavior. So in case you think that this is just anecdotal, there was a study conducted in 2018 that polled almost 750 people, and they found that 23% of those participants reported being ghosted by a romantic partner, and almost 40% reported being ghosted by a friend, right? Why would it be so prevalent, though, if we all know how much this sucks? Well, psychological studies suggest that it may have more to do with how people view relationships in general. So in 2019, there was a study published in Imagination, Cognition, and Personality. And participants reported that they ghosted someone because of everything from attractiveness to convenience to safety. And that is quite a wide range of explanations. Now, there are other researchers that suggest that how you feel about ghosting could be based on how you think about relationships more broadly. And this is where we can find some intersections with attachment theory and how it expresses itself through attachment styles. So this research on relationship usually covers basically 2 types of beliefs, and that is destiny and growth. So if you are someone who's a strong believer in destiny, it means that you think the outcome of a relationship is more or less set in stone. It's either going to work or it's not. And if you think like this, you might also be someone who believes in soulmates, that there is someone who's fundamentally a perfect match, which means that you also believe that there are people who are fundamentally not a good match. And this is the mindset that most insecurely attached individuals have because it is rigid, inarguable, romanticized, and subject to external conditions. Now, on the other hand, if you're a stronger believer in growth, it means that you think relationships grow over time. If you think like this, you probably believe that all relationship hurdles can eventually be overcome. And this is the mindset that most securely attached individuals have because it puts an increased sense of agency and possibility in your own hands. You would have to believe that you are capable of change and that your partner is capable of change too in order to believe in growth. And of course, you would have to believe that you are worthy of those changes. Now, in that same 2018 study that I just mentioned earlier, they also found that people with stronger destiny beliefs, when compared to people with weaker destiny beliefs, were about 63% more likely to say that ghosting was an acceptable way to end a long-term relationship. And so presumably because people with stronger destiny beliefs are often quicker to end a relationship when they just don't think it's a good fit. Alternatively, they did suggest that these results could be related to whether or not participants thought they could be friends with somebody after a breakup. And if they did not, then they might not have cared so much about whether or not how the person responded to being ghosted. Okay. But why do you think that ghosting has become such a recent phenomenon? Well, the behavior of ghosting is not necessarily new, but our ability to look at, measure it, and experience it on a much broader scale is. So Esther Perel calls this a stable state of ambiguity. And she says that what we have today is a state of unclear relationships in which I get just enough not to feel alone, but I don't have to do any of the things that make me responsible and accountable to you. And because of our increasingly sophisticated methods of communication, the initial infatuation phase is intensified by uninterrupted connection through texts and social media and things like that, which means that the intensity of the rejection is also amplified once that other shoe drops. Additionally, as a culture, particularly westernized culture, we also increasingly have more of our sense of self-worth tied up in our love relationships than ever before, because we are, more so than ever before, searching for a sense of purpose and meaning through our love relationships. Now, I will add to this. I personally feel rubbed the wrong way whenever anybody says something or suggests something that I am accountable to them. It really pisses me off. And I think it is actually more that it is easier to view people as digital avatars on a screen than it is to relate to them as flesh and blood human beings. And because of the paradoxical closeness at a distance, we tend to experience because of increasing technological advances, it's easier for us not to have to face the emotional consequences of our decisions and thus not be challenged to acknowledge and fortify our own emotional boundaries. So in a nutshell, if we confuse empathy and enmeshment, we tend to avoid empathy because we fear enmeshment. And it's not about being accountable to somebody else. It's about missing out on the greatest gift human connection has to offer. And so the truth is, I am accountable to myself in the end, because I am the only one who has to live with the consequences of my actions most acutely. And if I am someone who claims to want a quality of relationship but does not act in accordance with that desire and then laments that there are too few options for love out there, then that is on me, right? And that is really what I think is the issue here, the accountability that we do not assume for ourselves and the quality of our relationships. So why do this? Well, while ghosting behavior is pretty easy to spot, the reasons for it, as we've discussed, are not so obvious. I want to offer you 8 possibilities, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. Okay, so first, the ghoster could be scared of a confrontation and hate the drama that comes with it. Secondly, let's say the ghostee could be, or the ghostee may be engaged with a dangerous person. It could be a stalker or someone who has ill intentions. And so for the ghoster, cutting off communication without much ceremony is actually safer than attempting to communicate at the end of a relationship. In fact, ending the relationship requires a level of deception. Okay. Thirdly, a ghoster could be afraid to hurt the other person or want to avoid disappointing the ghostee, so they assume it would be kinder if they just kept their mouth shut forever. The ghoster may have behaved in an unattractive or an unkind way, and they're fully aware that they did something wrong, but instead of admitting it because they'd have to face their own guilt, they cease all communications without notice so that they never have to tell you or anybody else about it. Unbeknownst to you, the ghoster may be suffering from something terrible, like a chronic illness or depression or some kind of trauma, and they choose to withdraw from you and potentially everyone else when their emotions or their condition becomes overwhelming to them. Number 6, frankly and quite honestly, the ghoster may never really have cared that deeply for you and was just kind of using you as a source of validation. Lastly, the ghoster may suffer from shiny object syndrome and become distracted and or find someone else to entertain them and just didn't feel obligated or committed enough to you and your interactions with them to inform you of this change of heart. So I think I said 8. These are 7 possibilities. Now, I think there are actually 1,000 other possibilities out there that could apply, but the truth is that if you have been ghosted, you are never going to know which of these really applies and which ones don't. But what you can do is choose the reasons that suit you best and allow yourself to move forward with a positive outlook on the possibilities for you. And so how do you do that? Well, rather than focusing on the experience of inexplicable loss and chasing after or protecting yourself from lovers that cannot show up for you fully, focus on what you do want. So learn how to magnetize that lover with staying power. And how do you do that? So let's talk about these 3 steps to magnetize lovers with staying power. So I'm going to go over these 3 steps more broadly today. And for our live streams next month, we're going to dig much more deeply into each one. Now, the first step is to reframe the story. And this is connected to the way I like to work in the McWilliam method, which is all about cognitive reframing. Okay. So if you've been ghosted and you struggle with insecure attachment, it is likely that you assume that there's something that you must have done wrong. But sometimes this is the universe trying to sort it out for you. So you might be in habit. You might be in a habit, however consciously or unconsciously, of choosing partners that suit an old paradigm of love for yourself. And so the universe kind of steps in and it knocks them off your path and it says, whoops, nope, try again. Don't worry though, keep going. Something's going to give. Each one gets a little bit closer, right? Eventually you'll nail it. So try to reframe the story from, I must be doing something wrong, to, I must be doing something right. If these ambivalent, inconsistent folks who are afraid of emotional honesty keep falling off my path with increasing frequency, then I guess I'm really not a match for that anymore. And it's not taking as long for that fact to emerge in my experience. Whoopee! It is not a waste of my time. In fact, this is saving me time. Okay? Now, the second step is to realize that the energy that attracts love, let's say romantic love, into your life is going to be qualitatively different than the energy that attracts success in things like business, for example, or success with familial or platonic relationships, among other areas of your life. And this is a really big topic that we are going to unpack in our live streams next month. So I recommend, again, subscribing and ringing the bell for notifications if you're interested in learning more about that. The third step is realizing that your relationship with a partner is often a mirror for your own inner relationship between you and you. Okay, so the best way to attract emotionally available partners is to get into dialogue with your own emotions and to make loving contact with what I'm going to call your self parts. And so once you have an adequate inventory, you can be more discerning about where, when, how, and with whom you make emotional investments, and how much of what is in activation between you is truly in alignment with your parts and or with their parts. So in this way, you can better determine what is and is not within your control, and thus make better decisions about what stories you are going to tell yourself when you want or need to make meaning of your experiences, especially if you had an experience of being ghosted, for example. So in other words, you can say to yourself, this serves me, and choose to keep it. Or you can say, this does not serve me, and choose to let it go. But many insecure individuals struggle to assume that kind of power or authority over themselves because they tend to fall subject to this idea that there is some external objective truth about their value that they have to live up to, and that their partner, especially one that has ghosted them, is somehow the keeper of that truth. But we are the advocates of our own value, and we often don't treat others the way that we would like to be treated. We tend to treat others the way that they treat themselves. And so how you treat yourself is a model for how others wind up treating you. And so is your inner voice kind to you, or is it critical? Does your inner voice think you have a lot to offer, or does it believe that you screw up all the time and must be doing something wrong? And do your current relationships confirm these ideas of that inner voice? Now, I know that I've laid a lot on you in today's video in a short amount of time, and there is just so much more to unpack on this topic, which is why I've dedicated next month's live stream events to picking apart these 3 steps in great detail. But before I go and address some of what we've got in the chat box here, I want to just summarize what we've covered already. And first, there are 3 types of ambivalent behavior in dating, and that is simmering, icing, and ghosting, which we've just covered here today. Secondly, ghosting behavior is not entirely unacceptable to people who believe in destiny or don't believe that they would remain friends with an ex after breaking up. On the other hand, people who are inclined to believe in growth when it comes to relationships think it's pretty awful. Number 3, technological advances in social communication and social sharing make the highs of connection that much more intense, and thus the lows of ghosting that much more painful. So much so that ghosting can have real negative physiological effects on the brain and the body. Number 4, while ghosting is easy to spot, there's not always an easy or one explanation for it, and there's no way to determine which reason would fit anyway. And so the best you can do is choose or I might even suggest invent an explanation that serves you best and move on. And number 5, you do that, meaning you move on, by implementing 3 important steps. And that is reframing any negative stories you may be telling yourself. Second, recognizing that the energy that attracts romantic love is qualitatively different than other types of energy that make you successful in other aspects of life. And third, realize that a relationship with a partner is often a mirror for the relationship between you and you. So I want to just take a moment and peek at the chat box here. Let's see. Ghosted after 3 years and gaslighted when I asked 7 months later. Mm-hmm. Had a close friend ghost me. It hurt at first, but then I realized I'm better off without that type of friend. Amen. I grew up thinking I needed my opposite. Now I realize that for me, that just creates conflict. Now I'm waiting to meet someone like myself so I can have a cooperative relationship. Well, so that's the interesting thing, is that our opposites are not actually our opposites, right? Our opposites are actually a mirrored reflection of our inner life. Wondering what some signs are that you're no longer simmered by someone. Well, they either disappear or they increase their commitment to you, right? It is possible that people who get stuck in that also don't anticipate such behavior, and it's something that we wouldn't do to ourselves. So we have hard time identifying it. It's thought that we wouldn't do ourselves. I don't know if it's such a behavior. Well, oftentimes, especially if we're in insecure relationships, we attract people because they are a reflection of the parts that we have repressed. So we accept in other people behavior that we would not accept within ourselves. And we are attracted to them because we would not accept it within ourselves. So they get to live it out for us. And even if we are in judgment of what they are expressing or how they are behaving, it's safer to express it outwardly on something out there than it is to notice that that is something that we harbor within ourselves, right? Yes, I think that's true. You're expecting to be treated like you would treat someone else, but it's flawed thinking. Well, we have a tendency, especially when we have insecure attachment styles, we have a tendency to give what we want to receive. We ask what we want to be asked, and we say what we want to hear. And that is because often when we struggle with insecure attachment, it's because attachment wounds occur in early childhood. And when we are in early childhood, when we are young children, cognitively and developmentally speaking, our brains are egocentric, which is to say we really only understand things from within our own perspective. So we assume, so when we give what we want to receive, we assume that the other person is doing the same thing, but that's not the case. And or the thing that they are giving that they assume that we would want to give also is from within their perspective. So we think they're just being mean because in our experience, they are being mean. And then they think we're just being mean because within their experience, we are being mean, right? But it's an egocentric perspective. So this is kind of like when we talk about the 5 love languages, right? Like being willing to surrender and open up and understand that if someone else experiences love in a different way, it's not a criticism of how you experience love. It's just that they experience it in a different way, right? And then learning someone else's language and humbling yourself enough to communicate in a way that somebody else would understand what it is that you're communicating in their vernacular is actually one way in which you can start to make loving connection and contact. But our egos sometimes don't like doing it. Well, it must mean if they're not willing to do that for me, or if they're not willing to change the way they are to suit the way I want them to be, then they must not love me. And that's not really a fair standard to place on anybody, right? And helpful ideas and points. I've often reflected on that to see how it's been implemented. What has helped me from letting people hurt me is knowing that I am loved, that there was never a moment where I wasn't loved, and I will always be loved. It's hard to anticipate all sorts of behaviors. Well, that's the thing. You can't. And actually, we talked about this in the last live stream where I talked about sometimes we assume that just because we're single, we're doing something wrong. Sometimes when you're single, it's because you're doing something right. It's because you're doing something right. And if you want to know more about that, I invite you to check out the live stream I did last Monday when we talked about this 6 reasons you're still single. You know, you cannot, and I also talked about the rabbit hole of red flags, right? You can't you can't. Sometimes you're, like we talking about with ghosting, and the most painful form of ghosting is when there is no warning sign, right? When you feel like you're actually engaging with someone, and then all of a sudden it's just the communication completely stops. But like I said, I think the only thing you can do in that instance is write the narrative and the story that serves you best and keep going, because you do have that much authority. I mean, you do have that much power to write that story in the way that would allow you to move on, because inevitably the only one who suffers from choosing to do something else is you, right? To beat yourself up, to say, I must have done something wrong, or to write some other narrative around it that you think is connected to some objective truth, which is in the hands of someone outside of yourself. That doesn't serve you, right? How do I address the feeling of being smothered in a relationship and it causes me to withdraw? Well, that is a twofold process, right? I talk a lot more about this actually in my course on Avoidant Attachment 101. And if you're interested in learning more about that, there is a video on my channel called Avoidant Attachment 101. It talks about the strengths of avoidant attachment. And I invite you to check that out, because I go into that a lot more detail. But it's twofold. It is being in process with yourself, because sometimes when we have avoidant attachment, we tend to be hypersensitive to even benign requests. And so we experience that feeling of being overtaken, even when that is not the intention of your partner, and even if what the partner is expressing is a perfectly reasonable desire and or request, because we have come from enmeshed backgrounds where, and I connect with this, which is why Esther Perel's use of the word accountable really irritates me. Because, when we come from enmeshed family backgrounds, people love the word accountable. They love it. And because they want you to be accountable to them. And they don't mind being accountable to you, because that is a state of what I perceive to be enmeshment or merger that they know how to exist in. It's not that I don't agree with accountability as a concept, but I think the accountability that we have to have is to ourselves. And that in the end, that is the only thing that you are ultimately accountable to. It's not that we don't influence other people. I also did a live stream about that 2 weeks ago, about the power of emotional influence. There are degrees of emotional influence that we have on each other, of course, but sometimes they get so overblown. And when it has been overblown, then we could become hypersensitive to things like requests for contact with a partner. And we don't know how to gauge, is this a request that is attempting a form of control over me? Or is this just a request that is expressing a desire for connection? I will say that almost always when someone is attempting to control you, it is actually a request for connection. It's just hard for us to see that because we feel so triggered by the surface structure communication, which is the need to control. Right? But any need like that is fueled by a fear, and behind every fear is a deeper desire, right? So the deeper desire is usually the part of the way that we relate to each other that's much more empathetic and sympathetic, right? So when I say it's twofold, it is that being aware of what your hypersensitivities may be to even benign requests, and being aware that, oh, I'm feeling really triggered now, even though that's a benign request. And I'm just going to remind myself that that's a benign request, and realize that reaction is my own stuff and not necessarily related to what's happening in the present moment with this person. And if you're not sure, then you just check. And also feel like you can express your needs all along the way. The other thing is that a lot of partners that struggle with avoidant attachment, they're actually terrible people pleasers. Terrible. They're the worst people pleasers. They're worse than anxious open hearts, because they struggle so much with their boundaries that they give and give and give and give and give, and they don't know how. I'm going to hurt them if I say I want space. If I tell them I'm feeling smothered, they're going to take it personally and disappear forever. So they just keep repressing. Yeah, it's great. They yes you to death, and then they hit that wall and they just can't do it anymore. And if they did continue doing it, it would mean an annihilation of self. So they in many cases, ghost. Or they will tell you, I can't do this anymore. You'd be better off without me. Or they think that if they now voice what they do and don't need, that their partner will be floored. And they don't want to see the look of disappointment on their face. And then they slip into that destiny thinking that we're talking about, right? That rigid thinking that this just means it's never going to work. And so they end it, right? So part of it is being aware of and responsible for what your reactions are all along the way. And as I said before, I think if we are ambivalent, that's okay. No one's saying you're not allowed to be ambivalent, but just be honest about it. And if you know that you are ambivalent and you're able to be honest about it, allowing the other person who may not be ambivalent to go on their way if they need to, right? But then we have this reaction like, no, but I don't really want you to go all the way out. I just want you to come a little bit in, right? And so, that's where we kind of get into that playground of contrast and how we butt up against each other's needs, desires, and what it is that we really want. And then that's where the open heart or the anxious partner who may be in partnership with someone like that learns to establish their boundaries and say yes or no when they need to, and to excuse themselves from ambivalent behavior if they need to. On the other hand, there may be partners who are willing to engage in that playground and explore ambivalent behavior because their partner is in fact a mirror reflection of their own inner ambivalence. Because when we chase people that are emotionally unavailable, and they're emotionally unavailable, what aspects of you are not available to you? So in chasing something outside of yourself, imagine all the thoughts and analysis and overthinking and cyclical obsessiveness energy that goes into that. And imagine what a massive distraction that is from having to sink into what may be unacknowledged inside. Left unacknowledged inside. And so all that anxious preoccupation becomes a beautiful, huge, massive, intricate, complex, painful, exciting smokescreen for whatever is existing beyond it. And usually that is a sense that I don't really want to be seen, because if I am really seen, if I am truly seen by someone, then I am truly at risk of being rejected again, right? And that's really scary. So really what we're struggling with is receiving. What everyone is struggling with is receiving, right? So I know I went a little off the rails there, but I hope that was helpful. And we are coming to the end of our time here for today. But again, if you want to learn more about this, I'm going to be talking a lot more about these steps in detail in January. We're going to dive into this with 3 more live streams, picking apart those 3 steps to magnetizing lovers with staying power. So I would love to see you back there if you decide to join me. And if you are someone who celebrates the holidays, I hope you enjoy your holidays and that you have an easeful passage into 2020. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here today.